Welcome to episode 6 of the Expert Cruise Show. I'm Anthony, and...
I'm Chris.
There we go, you see.
Welcome aboard.
It's only episode 6, so we haven't got a system yet. We haven't got a catchphrase, but we're working on it. We're working on it. We should probably start by thanking people for their support and their comments for the first 5 episodes. It's been really cool to kind of read what people have to say. And as we said very early on with this show, that we were going to take all comments on board, and we really want this to be a very kind of communicative operation. And so if you have any ideas or thoughts for things for us to discuss, then we are only too keen to take that on board.
Yeah, we've been getting some great comments through, Anthony, on the YouTube channel, particularly just everyone sharing their cruise stories. The episode, 2 episodes back, when we spoke about what might potentially be a perfect cruise ship, lots of opinions on episode 3. Lots of opinions. And I think we figured out in episode 4 that maybe we jumped the gun a bit because, of course, the ship that we were talking about in episode 3 doesn't have a promenade deck, so maybe there is no perfect ship. But loving all the comments.
I think we discovered in our quest for the perfect ship that there is no perfect ship. But saying that, and I also want to make this point again for our new viewers and listeners, is that, cruising is so subjective, and what works for us might not work for you. And really the point of this show is to expose, the reality and the facts about these beautiful ships, the differences between the cruise lines, and then, about you finding that ship that really works for me. I'd been on the Celebrity Edge a couple of weeks ago. That's why we broadcast live from the Celebrity Edge, and we had that whole conversation about the retreat, because I got the Celebrity Move Up. So if you haven't seen that episode, please go back and watch it, because the irony, as you pointed out, was that I said I will never be in the retreat. I'm very much a steerage passenger, and then literally a week later I'd been upgraded. So
I know, isn't it funny? And actually, a big part of your conversation in relation to the retreat was the experience around the dining on board Celebrity Edge. And food is, of course, such a huge part of the cruise experience. And if you think back to the early age of cruising, when people in the 70s and 80s and into the 90s were taking a cruise vacation for the first time, the cruise lines used to really focus in on this all-inclusive, all you can eat, get access to world-class food on this cruise for just the price of your cruise ticket. And of course, things have changed quite a lot in the last few decades, with specialty dining and ships now centralizing their food service, with shoreside having a lot more to do with creating menus and creating the food quality on board the ships than what used to happen back when the executive chefs used to do it all on the ship. So we thought today we would talk about food and dedicate an entire episode to the joys of eating on a cruise.
I would say I'm an endomorph. Would you describe yourself as an ectomorph? I presume you're tall and slim, and I'm increasingly shorter and fatter as a result of going on cruises. And I don't know about you, but when you get on board and you say to your travel partner, we're only going to do the stairs. It's the only way to deal with this voyage and eating this much food. We're just going to do the stairs. Up and down, and then within 48 hours, you've dropped the upstairs, you're doing elevators up and stairs down, and then another 24 hours later, you're like, screw the stairs, let's just take the elevator.
Do you know the one that makes me laugh every time? Is I'm actually one of those people who does on occasion use the gym on board the cruise ship. I know. Well, if you're working on board, you have to try and keep fit. But I think it's so funny because I watch people take the lift to the gym, and I think that's hilarious.
Yeah, they've just wasted at least half a dozen calories.
But I guess the gym comes at the end of this episode, because first we're going to talk about how we're going to put all that weight on.
That's what I was going to say. So, am I right in saying that the average calorie intake for a male is around 3,000 calories a day, and for a female it's 2,500, or is it 2,000 for a female and 2,500 for a man? I thought it was a good place to start, just so that people can understand, because I don't know how you eat at home, but I don't do like 4 meals a day, afternoon tea, late night snack at home, right? I try and have 3 straight meals. There'll be a little bit of snacking and grazing, but in the main is not the case. So really it's just the cultural shift between being at home and being at sea. especially when you're on a cruise line that is famous for having good food, and we'll talk about which ones in just a moment. But I'm very interested first to talk about the intake and what it is about spending the money on the cruise and wanting to get your money's worth when it comes to what food is available. Because as I said on an earlier episode, I've seen people who have an early supper in the dining room and then up to the buffet for dinner number 2. And it's the same with breakfast. Breakfast in the room, which sometimes is free, and then straight to breakfast once you've woken up a bit, and to pile into the pancakes, the things that don't travel so well. So it is interesting that people do want to get their money's worth from the kitchen.
Absolutely. I mean, I think some of that is a learned behavior, I suppose, because cruising for so long used to focus in on elements like access to restaurant quality food whenever you wanted it. And back in the day, of course, most cruise lines had the open buffet. You had a midnight buffet, which was all decorated in the evenings. You could have, for many cruise lines, of course, 24-hour room service, which is becoming less and less free, complimentary. I shouldn't say free. Complimentary is part of your ticket. You get access to that menu whenever you wanted it, which is much harder to find these days. And of course, quite controversially, just this last few weeks, one of the major brands has just taken complimentary room service off its Britannia grade, and that, of course, is Cunard, with introducing a new charge. So there's all sorts of changes happening in that market, and I think people kind of learnt that by going on the cruise. I mean, you used to talk to people about, like, what do you love about cruising? And they'd say, I can unpack once, the hotel takes me to my destination, and I can eat whenever I want, whatever I want.
Right.
Those were the 3 big selling points. And now it's a little bit different, because you can still obviously get access to a lot of food, but whether or not it's included in the fare, or whether or not it's an additional charge, or whether or not it's available at the time you want it. Your conversation a couple of episodes back about, Luminaire Onboard Edge being closed when you wanted to eat. There is now a lot more sort of consideration that has to be taken. So I guess in some strange sort of way, when you do get to that opportunity where you sit down and you've got access to the menu, people just want to stack up on it because they've paid for it in their fare.
And the other thing is, it's nice to experience like a old school service, because most people don't live like that at home, where you take a seat and a napkin is placed on your lap for you. I mean, some people have never experienced that, and they're like, what are you doing? Get off me, what are you doing? And my kids, like, the first time it happened on a Royal Caribbean ship with the kids, the napkin was lifted and put on their lap very gently and respectfully, and they were like, really? It goes there? Like they've spent their whole lives with the napkin just screwed up on the table in front of them. And so that was kind of cute for them to witness that. But I do think that it's not silver service, but the equivalent, the modern day version of silver service, where you've basically got somebody who's introduced themselves, who is your waiter for the duration, who gives you, makes a connection with you and pours your water and keeps topping it up, hopefully. And that, it's just lovely to experience that. And I always try to recommend that people use the main dining rooms rather than the buffet, because it's more sanitary. That's the first thing I would suggest. But secondly, being served, I think, is really one of the nicest parts of paying for a cruise. Why do self-serve? It's like doing self-checkout at a grocery store. It's like, you're not paying me for this. Why am I doing the self-checkout?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was just, when you were talking about that service and how your children, weren't sure what to do with a napkin, it reminds me of my first ever formal dining experience on board the QE2 back in the 1990s when I was a kid. And like, we'd been so funny, my parents had been taking us on occasion to Pizza Hut, which of course was in the 90s was, in our actual building. You'd actually go into the restaurant, and in Australia from the mid 90s onwards, maybe it was all you can eat, but before that they actually used to bring the dish to you, and we would kind of rehearse the kind of behavior you would expect at a restaurant on board a luxury ocean liner, as they marketed her at the time. But our first night on board, it was actually, the ship left Auckland Harbour really late, midnight, and it was a once in a lifetime experience as we thought it was going to be. Of course, it turned out not to be the case, but very fortunate for that. And the whole menu was so intimidating. I mean, this was the Mauritania restaurant, which was the lower of the grades. Right. But there was all these things like written in French I couldn't understand. There was sorbets between each course. I mean, now looking back, and I've got all those original menus, they're just exquisite. Like the attention to detail is amazing. But we didn't know what to order, so we said to the waiter, like, the ship's in Auckland Harbour, and just off the pier we'd seen a McDonald's, and we said to the waiter, "Can we have McDonald's for dinner?" And he said, "Yes, of course. We'll go and get it for you." And we thought, as children, he was going to go ashore and get us McDonald's. But what they did is the chef made us a cheeseburger and fries. And they brought it and they put the paper and they rolled it up to make it kind of look like it's a takeaway. That is just so cool. And obviously by the end of that, it was a 5-night cruise, but by the end of it, I was having the sorbets between courses and, ordering off the main menu. But just the fact that they went to that level of detail and they cared enough, that really stuck with me forever.
So interesting, isn't it? I was also thinking, as you were saying, that you were 11 when you went on the QE2. I was 9 when I went on the QE2. And, I lived in England and was boarding in Southampton. And you grew up in Australia, and you were boarding in Auckland. And isn't that interesting that the same ship was there for you as it was for me? And I think this, again, is the thing that binds us together, is that you can sail. Like, you were on edge recently in Australia. I was on edge recently in Vancouver. And it's just...
because they move, right?
Yeah, the ships are really traveling around the whole world. And you and I are... Even though you and I have never actually met in person, we have walked and tread the boards of the same ships and have these similar experiences. And again, this is another of the joys of cruising, is that you can talk to people about ships having had exactly the same experience, because the product is so consistent, even across the brand sometimes.
The other thing about a cruise, and I guess we are, as we tend to do, we're kind of meandering away from our...
We'll come back to food.
We'll come back on course. But it can also bridge time, and I find that really interesting, because I used to travel with my granddad, who has since passed away. But on the ships that I traveled on with him, when I go on board now, there are certain spots on the deck where in his 90s he just liked those spots, like they were his spaces on the deck. And so I go past that, particularly Queen Mary 2, and you'll see these little areas where I knew that he used to enjoy taking in the view. And it almost feels like that 15 years or whatever has just disappeared, and you're back there with that person. It's such an interesting experience. Some buildings and some places on land are similar. And I know you've obviously had a lot of experience on board the RMS Queen Mary, which is docked in Long Beach as a floating hotel. I will be going on board for my first time in just a few weeks' time. And, to think about being on that ship where those troops were, for example, during World War II, that I've spoken about so many times, and we've researched so much about it.
18,000 troops on the ship to be typically
there
carries
on
2,000.
That actual deck. Yeah. It's crazy. And actually, looping back to the food service, when you think about it, the food logistics and preparation is such a huge part of the food process on cruise lines. But when you go back to the era of the ocean liners, when these ships used to have the food provision for their very set number of passengers, and then they get requisitioned for wartime service. When you think about Queen Mary and Queen Elizabeth, they had to feed orders of magnitude more people than they would ever have had to do before. And they converted areas of the ship that were not food service areas into galleys, into mess halls, and the whole service had to change, which I think is interesting, because we have seen service, and maybe not so much service, but the way that food is acquired and prepared has changed as well, just in the last 20 or 30 years. Because if you look back to when I first started cruising, they used to even have, the executive chefs had so much control over the food that was being served and the menus that were being created. I mean, famously, QE2, for example, didn't have the same menu twice in 39 and a half years of service because it was all managed on board. And they used to say, like, you think back to ships like Sagafjord and Vistafjord when they sailed for Norwegian America Line, they would send a scout ahead of the ship to certain ports that were known for fresh food, and they would acquire fresh produce in those ports to bring on board to do the local flavors, which of course they just don't do these days. So the whole food network has changed so much as well.
My only experience of getting really fresh food was on the Celebrity Beyond a couple of years ago, where, and I did touch on briefly last week that the Celebrity Beyond's Eden restaurant was the best food I've ever had on a cruise ship ever, bar none.
Yeah, sure.
But we were just walking around Eden, and we saw this delivery had arrived from the port that we'd stopped at of fresh lobster. And it was piled high on the open kitchen, and they were cleaning them and preparing them. And so we went and had a chat with the sous chef, and they said, come tonight. We just got this incredible delivery of fresh lobster. And so we went that night, and it was incredible.
Well, a brand that I've spoken about many times, even on this show, that doesn't exist anymore, but was pretty important in our lives, was P&O in Australia. It was a separate brand to the rest of the P&O organisation. Same origins, but
R.I.P. P&O Australia.
Yes, I know. But you know what they used to do? They actually had this separate food acquisition system to the rest of Carnival, in that they used to get a lot of their fresh produce from the Pacific Islands, like direct from the exporters on the Pacific Islands. And so you'd have this very different style menu with very fresh produce on a brand that was lower end of the market, which was quite an interesting blend, how the ingredients can make such a huge difference to the overall food quality on board, despite what you're doing with it. Simple dish but done with great ingredients could be so much tastier than a over-the-top dish that's done with substandard ingredients.
Well, we kind of talked about that when I was doing my review of Lumine in the retreat, where
your steak was sounds delicious.
It wasn't just the steak. What they did actually serve, or I ordered a because we put some pictures up last week, or the week before last, I think it was, we put some pictures up of this lobster dish that I ate. And I just want to mention it because I don't think we talked about it in detail. But I love lobster. I have eaten it very rarely in my life, but it is delicious. I never thought that I would be served lobster that I couldn't eat because it was served in the most disgusting way. And we'll put the picture up again now, but it was basically a bowl of chilled lobster. I guess it was pincers. It was quite meaty, but it seemed to be on a bed of, I don't know if it was a grain. I couldn't even tell what it was. And then there was like phlegm on top with this awful, like too much sauce. It was horrific. And I was like, oh, this is disgusting. And so that's an example of where food goes wrong on cruise ships, where they have good ingredients, but they over-design the menus. And actually, things like lobster and crab, they need to be eaten neat. You don't even need anything on top. Just neat. Like, taste the fish, taste the seafood, taste the steak. Don't over-dramatize it, because you lose all the flavors.
It's funny you mentioned that, because I had, just before the pandemic, I was on Queen Mary 2 doing a transatlantic crossing, and it was for the 100th anniversary of Southampton being their home port, so it's a pretty special voyage. And we were travelling Britannia grade as guest speakers. You get to eat in the Britannia restaurant, absolutely gorgeous dining room, the best looking dining room on the ship,
undoubtedly.
But on this one particular night, we had some friends who were in Queen's Grill and who managed somehow to convince the maitre d' to allow us to come and have a meal in there with them for one night. Absolutely, exciting, and I was so grateful for the opportunity. But the worst lobster I have ever had in my life was in the Queen's Grill restaurant on the Queen Mary 2. Somehow they managed to make it both rubbery and soggy at the same time. And I don't know how you can do that. I really don't.
They should have had a lobster menu like they have a pillow menu, and you can choose how soggy you want that lobster to be. Kind of proves the point. And I do want to keep coming back to this, because someone in the comments, when we we were saying that the Celebrity Edge class is the best bang for your buck, therefore the best ship. It's so stylish and chic, and the food's so good that you don't really need to, upgrade yourself. Is that yes, of course, if you've got loads of money and you can afford to go on these luxury yachts and these much smaller ships, then of course, the chances are that you're going to have a more upscale experience, both in the dining rooms and also with service and facilities. But,
yeah, for sure.
I always work on the assumption that no one's got any money. I don't know why. I've always been like that. I always work on the assumption that pay the least, get the most. And I just for me, and I keep coming back to this, a cruise ship should cost around $1,000 a week per person at the very most. So you pay $2,000 for your vacation. That's US dollars.
You're talking US dollars.
US dollars. Yeah. And that's about the right price for a really nice cruise. Now, if you want to spend 2 or 3 times that, then yes, of course you're going to get something that is a little extra. But I personally think that is the sweet spot. And I did mention, around £100 a day or $130 a day is the sweet spot when you're trying to find, getting the value for what you have spent. And I always advocate for spending less, and then you're never disappointed. Because the people that overpay, they always get a sense that they've, is it worth it? I don't know. So with that in mind, let's talk about food, because the thing that I've always been really interested, and I've never done the kitchen tour. I don't know if you've done the kitchen tour, which sometimes
I have,
is offered as an excursion, but I've seen it in documentaries, of which I have watched dozens, incidentally, is the conveyor belt system for the main dining room. Just the way in which they're able to predetermine, like they'll know kind of in advance how much of what dish people are going to order, or how many of which dish people are going to order, because we think that we're all individuals, but we're not, Chris. We are very predictable animals, and if you put 3 dishes on a menu, right, if you do, let's say we do the if we do a what's that meat dish with the pastry around the outside that's so delicious, beef Wellington. So you do beef Wellington. Let's say there's a cod on there, and let's say there's a pasta dish on there. What are they going to sell the most of?
No, probably beef Wellington, right?
so it's not rocket science, but they obviously have
that's also
algorithms, don't they? They can work out who's going to order what.
I was going to say that's where this modern era of food resource management, I suppose, has become so important.
And it's connected to the inventory buying as well. So they never buy more than they need. They operate very lean systems. They know what they're going to sell, and then there's less waste as well.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things that I also find interesting is that, again, back in the day, you would have the chef special, for example, would be whatever they found in this latest port, or what special dish the executive chef really wanted to put on the menu. Quite often now you'll find that the chef special the day after is the meal that didn't sell, like the produce that didn't sell quite so well the day before. Kedgeree. Not to say that they're not heating it up again, but like if they've got 5,000 chickens or whatever, and they haven't used them all, that will become the chef's special towards the end of the cruise, because they need to use that inventory up. There are still some that are much more bespoke, and there are still some restaurants that are much more bespoke. I'm talking mainly in terms of the big cruise lines, the conglomerates that have multiple brands. They can use these resource management systems to track not only what's going to be eaten, but how much of an item, when it needs to be restocked. And when the world shut down in 2020, it took a while for this network to shut down too. So you were getting food deliveries to ports where no cruise ships were, because there's a delay in that supply chain to actually shut everything down and then open it all back up again, which is why when it reopened, it was one ship at a time for most brands rather than all at the same time, notwithstanding the fact that people didn't necessarily want to travel at that time, so they needed to do it slowly, but they couldn't ramp up the production line or ramp up the supply chain as quickly as what they had shut it down, because on the back end, what we weren't seeing is all of the disruption that shutdown caused.
I kind of grew up in restaurants and hospitality because my dad worked in that industry, and Marco Pierre White, who is a celebrity chef, doesn't he lend his menu to one of the shipping lines? I think it's P&O actually. I think he does the food for P&O. But he was like my adopted uncle because he was my dad's best friend. So I was always we were always hanging out, and I was often being sent down to the kitchens where he was working at various hotels and things. I remember I once had to take him a transistor radio so he could listen to a soccer match it was quite rudimentary in the 80s, but that's kind of how we did it.
Life was simple back then.
Very simple. But the point is, so I've always, been afforded the opportunity without having to pay for it to taste good food and understand this high-end level, not just of the kitchen, but also of the front of house, the dining room and service as well. So I come to this with some education, not necessarily great taste, but with a little experience. And I do recognize that because customers are less discerning than ever before, and that is just by nature of modern informality. We've become less and less formal as a society, especially in the United States. Not that they've never really had so much of that in the United States. Obviously, the UK was full of white tie tails and toffs, and so it was, we kind of started in different places. But I do feel that as the lines take advantage of customers being less discerning, it means that there will always be some people like myself who are stuck in the past, maybe, or we have too much experience of the past, whereby we will notice things, and we made that point about the teacups missing from the retreat lounge, didn't we? And didn't someone write to us and say, those are mugs that you were pointing to?
Yes, you got challenged.
I did get challenged, and that's fine.
That's good.
A teacup, obviously, is not a mug, but when you've got a coffee cup, the teacup can be a mug. Do you understand the difference? It's like three-dimensional
coffee
chess.
Cup debate.
Yeah. So the mug trounces the coffee cup, but it's still not a teacup. So
look, I think the biggest thing that came out of that, Anthony, is that we can all agree that there's no possible situation where a paper cup was acceptable
for $10,000 for.
Now, if you don't have a clue what we're talking about, go and watch that episode.
That's episode 4.
It's quite controversial.
Yeah, very controversial. So just getting back to the kind of service and the food standards, how many people are going to really know the difference between a good steak and a bad steak? You can't. When you're on land, it's hard to tell sometimes. You go to these chain steak houses, you don't really know, and invariably any corporate chain is going out of their way to find the cheapest ingredients. So my wife is a chef. She used to have a restaurant. She used to make all her own dressings. She'd make the ranch manually, and she'd make all these beautiful salad dressings, and then time goes on and the change of ownership, and then they're just buying it all. And there are these huge catering companies in the US that basically sell everything you would need to serve in a restaurant. You don't actually have to cook anything. Everything comes pre-prepared. All the sauces, all the soups, they're all pre-made in bulk. There's a lot of processing involved, and for many of the customers, they won't know the difference.
Well, actually, that's probably a good little segue, because I have had the opportunity to do many galley tours on ocean liners and cruise ships, and I think there's quite often a belief that everything's brought in ready to go, and that's not the case.
Correct, yeah.
So despite the fact that on some cruise lines, I will say this, it may be controversial, but I don't actually rate the food in some restaurants, on some lines, for some meals. Like, I don't think that most cruise lines can do breakfast as well as you can do at home. For example, like just the freshness of cooking, scrambling eggs, or I hate the use of powdered eggs rather than real eggs.
Do you? That's so interesting, because I love a powdered egg.
Oh, it's awful!
I love it. I specifically go to the buffet for breakfast because I love the powdered egg. How many people do you think know that those bulk scrambled eggs, which you see them sometimes out the back tipping out of huge bags, right? Because they come, I don't know how they do it. What do they do? Mix it with water or something? I don't know how they do it.
I mean, it's the sort of stuff they use in the space station.
Right. But I think cruise ship powdered egg that is moist and has very even lumps in it is the most delicious. It's like rice pudding for eggs. And
I'm determined this isn't going to derail our friendship.
It's okay, each to their own. But do you know, the last time I came off a ship, which was very recently, I actually went on Amazon to see if they sold powdered eggs so that I could order it and see if I could make it that bad at home.
This is going to be the thing that gets the comments in this video, I think.
Sorry to interrupt.
Okay,
you.
So with that, no, that's okay. It's trying to debunk some of the myths about this whole thing, is that a lot of stuff is actually produced fresh, created fresh on board. So,
apart from the eggs,
for example, I guess it depends on the cruise line as well, because you can go to the buffet and say to them, "I'd like you to use a real egg."
They have an eggs your own way station normally, don't they? And they'll scramble you some eggs there as well as make an omelette if you ask.
Which is why I prefer the buffet to the main dining. And most ships, if I'm going to have
the breakfast,
have eggs. I also travel with I've traveled with a friend of my childhood best friend of mine who also does comedy on the cruise ships, and he can't eat eggs at all, so his breakfast is quite different to mine. But you know, the thing is, when you go through the galley and you do the galley tour, you can see the sort of areas where they're really focusing in. So there's these massive vats. I'll put them up on the screen, but huge vats. They almost look like sort of half-sized jacuzzis almost, that they make the soups in, for example. And many cruise lines make their own breads on board. So you see the bread ovens and the baking trays.
Many of those are actually out on the shop floor, aren't they? So, you know, if you go to the bakery at the buffet, behind them invariably are the ovens, and you can watch I was waiting only a few weeks ago for croissant to come out the oven at breakfast on the Celebrity Edge. Yeah,
exactly. And, you know, if we think about the food service, so the dining rooms and the restaurants take up quite a lot of space on the floor plan of any cruise ship. But if you can kind of visualize doubling that space for the storage and the preparation, because not only is there the galleys, which are quite often co-located near the dining rooms, which is one of the reasons why on some cruise ships you'll have like an aft dining room that's only accessible from the aft stairs that you can't get to because the galley's stuck in the middle between the two dining rooms. But they've also got this whole food service, food storage area rather. So we're talking, you know, when you go to the bottle shop and there's the big fridge you can walk into where all the beer is stored. It's like massive versions of those. So there's cold rooms for beer and champagne and wine, and there's dry storage for things like pallets and pallets of Coca-Cola and other soft drinks and mixers. Then they have the cold storage for vegetables and fruit. They have the cold storage separate for meats, and the meats are all stored separately from each other and labeled so that they know when each one was loaded on board. And the whole process is just, I've even been inside the fridges where they store the ice sculptures that they've done up on deck. They've got these freezers that they store these things in.
They go back in the freezer so they can bring them out again without resculpturing.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Exactly.
Give me a refund.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's recycling. Yeah. But and on some ships, I mean, most ships, I suppose, these days, but they have some of the most expensive ingredients. Caviar, obviously very expensive. And on some ships, they carry so much of it, they keep it in a special area
that's
got a special lock. Yeah. Exactly. And the other one is it's that spice that makes everything go yellow. Saffron?
I was going to say it's either saffron or jaundice.
Definitely not jaundice. No, I think it was saffron. In terms of weight, is the most expensive per kilogram or per pound item they carry on many.
It's a delicacy, isn't it?
Yeah. So it's a remarkable space, this behind the scenes area. We've been very fortunate to see it all for the books we've written. We get to do these tours to photograph it. Yes. So it's a bit unfair really because everyone else has to pay. So we're very lucky that we get access to that, which has been quite cool.
And obviously the newer ships, and I just go back to Edge Class as an example because it has those 4 dining rooms at one end. If you look on the plan, there is a big open space behind the dining rooms, and you're like, well, what's that? Well, of course, it's a giant galley that is on 2 levels that is serving these 4 dining rooms. And, you know, I love looking at the plans and the schematics. You know, to me, that's really interesting. And, you know, I love peeking into like the service area and seeing escalators that go from the kitchen up to the dining room. Actual escalators. You know, I mean, I know Icon of the Seas has escalators for passengers to use, but really, escalators have been on ships for years in the kitchens. Was there an escalator on QE2?
There was actually, yeah. She had an escalator. So QE2 had a restaurants towards the front. You know, it was an interesting setup because they had an escalator that would connect the 2 galleys, but they had separate galleys for each restaurant. So they had a Mauritania restaurant with a Mauritania galley. They had a Coronia restaurant with a Coronia galley. Queen's Grill had its own galley. Yeah. The Lido had its own galley. So it was a bit more, I mean, probably less efficient, but a bit more personalized. So because here's the thing on QE2, particularly in the pre-carnival days, but even after that not only would you have a different menu every night for dinner across the ship, but the different restaurants would have different menus. And so when I first started traveling on that ship, and she wasn't the only one, like this is how they did it back then. But in the 90s, the Mauritania restaurant would not have the same menu as the Coronia restaurant. And the Coronia restaurant would have a different menu to the grills. And there was 3 grills on board: Queen's Grill, Princess Grill, and Britannia Grill. So they'd all have like variants of the menu.
Seems like a whole lot of work, doesn't it?
It does, but can you imagine like how much you think that the upgrade is worth it when you're doing that?
Yes, I guess so.
Like if you are a wealthy passenger in the 90s and you're choosing between a gorgeous original ocean view stateroom on QE2 with bath and the access to the Princess Grill that has its own bespoke lounge, there's access from a spiral staircase, and it has its own menu, or you're going to go and upgrade to a suite with a balcony and get the Queen's Grill, and you know you're going to get a completely different menu. You're going to get a cabin that's not original because it's added later, and it's a balcony, which is obviously going to make it quite different from the experience, probably a plus side to that. But you're also going to get this completely different menu on the completely different restaurant that's run completely differently from the other one. I guess it just made it feel like the whole thing was more special, I guess.
Well, you really are getting
very inefficient.
A ship within a ship within a ship there, aren't you? Because, you know, those grades and that first, second and third class really is, you know, goes back to the days of the White Star Line, and it hadn't really changed. And it's only really now, I think, that Cunard especially are trying to, and I think Stephen Payne makes this point, the architect and designer of Queen Mary 2, that, you know, he wanted for the steerage passengers eventually, he said you can buy, and to quote him, you could pay the least on board and still have the grandest dining room and expect a very good quality of service and food. So if we've covered breakfast, because, you know, remember, my recommendation is for the cruise lines that still offer you breakfast in the room, you should take it. If it's free, and even if it's just continental, take it. Again, it's not like being at home. So put the card on the door the night before and just fill in some coffee and some pastries and some orange juice, just some things just to get you started, because it's so luxurious to be served breakfast in bed. It really is. And maybe we should do a little bit more detail on the news that Cunard have just posted. It starts on the 1st of July, I think. And that really is when things are going to change big time for Cunard passengers, as in you'll still be able to get anything before 10 a.m. for free. But after 10 a.m., weirdly, instead of doing what other cruise lines have done where it's a $10 or $12 charge to get anything delivered, there's no delivery charge, but they've priced weird pricing on individual items.
Yeah, so the main, and so this is basically it's restricted to Britannia grade. Yeah. So that's the majority of people who are traveling, right? Like most people travel Britannia grade. And as you say, it's after 10 a.m. So the room service breakfast is covered in your fare. But after 10 a.m., the menu that you would use normally to get, you know, cheeseburgers or club sandwiches, or
and it was never a big menu. The Cunard room service menu only really was half a dozen things.
Yeah, and they used to do they used to do half a dozen things really well. Like the cheeseburgers, Cunard room service cheeseburgers were like some of the best I've ever had. Particularly on the Queen Victoria, they do a really good burger on the Queen Victoria. But these now are all priced, and this there was a bit of a hint of this because when Queen Anne first came into service in 2024. The menu in her cabins was different from the rest of the ships, where some items were complimentary as part of your fare, and some items, such as the burger, had a per item charge, and that was enough of a shock. But I think the big change now, obviously, is that. And I don't know if it's actually already in place because people are posting pictures of the menu. So it might have been 1st of June, actually.
Oh, okay.
That it came in. And I've stuck it up on the screen now because this one came from our friends at Cunard Down Under, which is a very active Facebook group. And they've got people everywhere who pick up on anything that's happening. Yep. They sent me the menu. And you can see each item is individually priced, and some of the items are quite, in US dollars, when you have to do the exchange rate, it's quite expensive actually. To think that getting scones delivered to the cabin has a double-digit price tag attached to it.
It's ridiculous, though. It really is, and it's nickeling and diming in a way that I think it takes away from the opulence of Cunard and that sense that you are, on the great ships of history, is that, sir, here are your scones and your tea, and that would be $10.99, please, mate. Do you know what I mean? It's like,
if you're having afternoon tea on a Cunard ship, particularly if it's Victoria, Elizabeth, or Mary, you should go to the Queen's room. Go and have the experience. And that's still included, of course, which is...
Right, but on Queen Anne, as I discovered in January, not enough room in the Queen's room for people to have afternoon tea. Because,
you have to get there early for Queen Anne.
Right, and then, in fact, they were putting out plastic chairs in the Queen's room to try and, give people more seating. Like horrible kind of school or hospital plastic chairs in the middle of this room. So we ended up doing the overflow, which was the Britannia Club, and it was a nice opportunity to see the Britannia Club, which was lovely. And
Britannia Club's a nice space to do overflow in. On some of the others, they also serve it in the Lido or the King's Court, and that's not the environment. I mean, it's fine if you want a scone and you don't want the fuss, but if you want the afternoon tea experience, that's in the Queen's room. But as you say, like other cruise lines also offer menus with there's a variety of different approaches. Your all-inclusive cruise lines, your Seabourns and your Silver Sea and the very high quality cruise lines, all the food and beverages, except for very expensive, spirits and wines, is included in the fare. So you don't have to worry about any extra charges. Then you get to other brands, as you've mentioned, Celebrity, but also some others. Princess has a fantastic room service menu that you can actually access through the medallion on their televisions. Right. And there's a cover charge, but I don't think it's per item, if I remember correctly. And then, of course, there's this per item charge, which I think is just the most... I sense that's why so many people are so angry.
Well, they obviously tested it on Queen Anne, and remember they've done it in the Golden Lion pub as well, which on all of the other three Cunard ships, all the food is free. They started pricing some of the meals, including the hamburger, as we discussed previously, and it just didn't make any sense, so eventually everyone's just ordering either the pie and mash, the chicken tikka masala, or the fish and chips, right? So they become the kind of...
The chicken tikka masala is good on
It's
Cunard,
great on Cunard, especially in the pub, but those become the staples, and the things like the hamburger that people were choosing before, they're now not doing because they don't want to pay $10 or $15. So to me, it's a false economy.
It's funny how particular about our hamburgers we are as a cruising culture, because it is actually one of the differentiators on some of the brands. I mean, Royal Caribbean has Johnny Rockets on board, which is an
upcharge.
And Carnival has Guy's Burger Joint,
which people love. Guy's Burger Joint, and that's included. There's no upcharge with Guy's.
Well, the other thing that's interesting about Guy's is that it's available on the Carnival ships, with the exception of Carnival Adventure and Carnival Encounter, which are our two Australian-based Carnival ships that used to be P&O Australia.
I'm so sorry.
I know.
They even added Guy's Burger Joint to the two former Costa ships that just move over to Carnival as well.
Yeah. You mean Carnival by Costa by Carnival?
Costa by Carnival. So
I can't for the life of me understand how that brand mix-up works. It's very
well.
confounding
The way
to
they're
me.
marketing it is they're saying come for a truly Italian experience, but then they've added Guy's Burger Joint because they know how popular it is. And then, of course, if you're on Royal and you're in the kind of lime and coconut kind of lifestyle, then they'll have Mexican food by the pools and stuff, and that's fantastic as well because it's like street food. It's supposed to be informal. You're supposed to eat it with your hands. People take it around the pool, and I think that's great. But it's very interesting how you and I have identified breakfast as being the way we like to do it slightly differently. I would say that lunch is a harder opportunity. It's a harder choice to go to the main dining room for lunch.
Yes.
Because it always takes so much time.
For sure.
And it's like, do I want to spend an hour at lunch or do I want to spend 20 minutes at lunch when I could be having fun doing other things? And so it's quite a commitment going to the main dining room for a lunch service. And the food invariably is not dissimilar to what you would get in the buffet restaurant anyway.
Yeah, I think that's the funny thing about lunch as well, is that because you're out and about, the cruise ships that have more alternative options are quite often better for lunch.
Yes.
Even when I'm traveling on more traditional cruise lines, I will quite often go to the grill, the on-deck grill, and just get something from there. And actually, funny thing is that we were talking about our, eating habits. I'm not the sort of person who eats big meals generally. Particularly during the day. So lunch is always a harder option for me anyway, right, because I'm like, do I really want to be eating a big meal and then feel tired?
I wish I was like you. Afternoon. I'm going to start with a really big breakfast to set me up for the day. Then I'm going to have a little snack around 11:30, a cup of tea and a bit of a pastry. Then I'm going to have a huge lunch to see me through because I'm not going to eat much at dinner. Then there's afternoon tea, so I'm going to eat all of that. And then dinner time, I'm like, let's just have a big dinner so we don't eat again later, and then later we go and have another late night snack as well. So I can't do what you do. I would
feel so sick.
What do they say? It's like have breakfast like a prince, have lunch like a king, and dinner like a pauper. There's a phrase, but anyway, I'm just king every time. King breakfast, king lunch, king dinner. I do want to question something that you just said though. The onboard grill, I have never had any luck with. The poolside grill, whether it be on Celebrity, which I've done many of, they call it the mast grill. I've always found the food from there to be utterly disgusting. Completely inedible from the mast grill. They just throw it at you. It's horrible. Cunard, I haven't really done many fair weather Cunard cruises to kind of try their outdoor dining in that way, but I haven't heard great things particularly. And with Royal Caribbean, it's kind of similar. So what is it about that kind of grill? How does one get a better grill experience? Because I've always found that outdoor grill to be just, it's not barbecue and it's not like indoor dining. It's a bit of a hybrid. And to me, unless I see a really good quality brioche bun for that burger and a thick patty, invariably it's a skinny patty and it's a horrible flour bun, and I'm just like, oof, keep it. Yeah.
I mean, I guess it depends on what you're looking for. Some of the better ones I've had is Onboard Carnival Luminosa, I think it was. Yeah. There's tacos that they make, and they kind of freshly make the soft shell tacos. They freshly make them there for you. Lots of salads to choose from. Yes. So you basically they'll serve you up the chicken or the beef or whatever it is that they've got available that day, or the vegetarian option with the beans, and then you go over to the salad bar, a bit like the old Sizzler salad bar back in the day, and there's all the different toppings and salads
and
stuff.
Like the Pizza Hut salad bar almost.
Exactly. Yeah. Let's link back from when I was 11 years old, and on Cunard. Again, it depends on the ship. It seems like each ship's slightly different. I think, again, Queen Victoria, has the best on-deck grill by the aft swimming pool. And this is just an opportunity to, again, if you don't want to worry about all of the finishes, if you've got more simple taste, and you just want to have a simple burger with some salad, don't worry about chips and stuff. It's actually quite quick. Yeah. It's actually quite good quality. They cook it for you fresh. It's not sitting. I hate the buffet burgers where they sit 100%. Them there in that bain marie like McDonald's used to do in the 80s. No, thank you.
Yeah. Make me one fresh.
The boardwalk on Queen Mary 2 is in a weird spot right at the top of the ship. Not as good actually. The food quality there is not
Is
as
it
good
ever
as Queen
open,
Victoria's.
that Boardwalk Cafe at the top of Queen Mary too? I've never seen
Well,
it
I mean,
open.
I've sailed on her a lot in summer in Australia, so it's always
Right.
open here. But I don't know, in the Atlantic, I didn't even.
No, it's totally closed on the Atlantic crossing. But I would love you to post some pictures of that if you have any, because I've never actually seen that Boardwalk grill kind of open at all.
Yeah. No, we've got pictures inside. Yeah.
So let's just we're kind of getting through the day. So that's lunch kind of taken care of. I should just say that.
Can I add another lunch?
Go ahead.
Actually,
Sorry.
another lunch
Yes.
option. If the ship has freshly made pizzas,
Ooh.
because in the on the Edge class they do freshly made pizzas towards
Normally
the aft. I don't know if they do it in the others.
Right, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
Most of the ships tend to have their pizza ovens at the back of the buffet, don't they?
Yeah. Queen Victoria and Queen Elizabeth have it in the Lido. There's on the Carnival ships. There's actually multiple pizza offerings, and they actually do free pizza at certain times of the day, which is quite.
Well,
good.
they also do it on the promenade, on the boardwalk as well. You know, you can go down to what's the name of that? It's like it's where people come to get a slice of pizza, or they come to get a little cake in the afternoons. I forget the name of it.
Oh, you've got
We'll
me.
put a picture up of it, but.
It's been a long time since I've been on Rock
Okay,
Caribbean,
well,
actually. So.
they do really good pizza. And I think the point that we're making is that, I don't know about you, but I try to order things that I don't really have at home. So, things that are either a little bit special or using that actually require some skill, some actual cooking skill. So I'll have pizza if it's like 3 o'clock in the morning and it's an emergency, right? But I'm not going to kind of use it up as a main meal because there's just so much other food to have. But I wanted to mention NCL's curries because for me it's my go-to, guaranteed, provided it has got the condiments as well. I want the kind of reuter, I want some flatbread, some roti, I want some naan, I want some chutney. And I'm actually salivating now just talking about
I know. P&O UK also does a very good curry.
Yes,
and that actually links back to their heritage because they used to have huge numbers of crew from India based on their transit.
I thought you were going to say it's because the chicken tikka masala was invented in England. That's why.
No. It's just more. I think it's more the fact that they had the natural.
Yes.
Like the skill come on board through their crew, as you were mentioning with NCL, and there's also a curry option on Fred Olsen as well. They have a curry restaurant at the front of the buffet.
Yes,
at least on Boletta and Borealis.
And Queen Anne's just started, an Indian restaurant on board as an upcharge restaurant. It's not that expensive. It's like $25 a head, I think, or $30 a head.
Aranya.
But from what I heard initially, people like Carol and Paul were trying it, and they were like, "There's no spice. There's just no spice. Like the food is almost too fancy." And for me, the thing about Indian food is you should be eating it with your hands, and it should be a bit messy.
Yeah.
And they've gone a little bit too upscale with that restaurant. So I think they've increased the spice now in there because of customer feedback. But again, I don't know that Indian food should be fine dining. To me, that's a bit of a contradiction.
We have one more meal to cover. We do have to dock this ship.
I know we do. Yes, we've only got a couple of minutes left.
Run over time. Dinner. What is your recommendations for dinner?
Well, it all depends on what day of the week it is because some ships do, special nights. So you don't want to miss the prime rib night, for example. Like you want to know, and some ships do prime rib on the first night, and some cruises do it on the last night. So I personally liaise with the kitchen, the staff. If I find that someone wearing a chef's hat in the buffet, I say, "What night is prime rib night?" And I note it, or I speak to the maitre d' in the main dining room because you don't want to miss the beef Wellington night. You don't want to miss the lobster tail. Oh my God, we could do a whole episode on lobster tail. You used to be able to get 2. Now you can only get 1. You have to pay for a second one if you want a second one.
Well, here's the other thing I'm noticing more and more as well is that it used to be on most brands like you described where there was the special nights. You'd have the lobster night, you'd have the beef Wellington night, you'd have the baked Alaska parade.
Well, that sometimes goes with the prime rib, the baked Alaska.
Well, I'm noticing now that on the menu, they have all those available at any time for a price.
Yes.
There's a separate little section, and they don't seem to do the nights as much.
Really?
Which, again, is a huge... Well, particularly, obviously, I've got more experience doing world cruise segments, right? And in world cruise segments, they across all the brands I've traveled with, they used to very much try and replicate that normal cruise experience during the segments. And more I'm finding now that you're not having these special events, and the menu shows... signature dishes or whatever, and it has... I noticed lobster on the signature dish of a line that used to do lobster as a special night just recently, and it was like, oh no, not another opportunity to get another upcharge.
But that's what it is. Unfortunately, it is all about revenue, and so that's why I'm saying, if you're going to do formal dining, find out which nights are the special nights if they're doing them, so you don't miss out. I mentioned last week, I think it was, we talked about my final lunch on the edge, where they did this beautiful, the most incredible buffet I've ever seen, and we put some photos up of the sculptures and everything. The food was fantastic. Again, I wouldn't have known about that if I hadn't have chatted to the staff, and they said, make sure you come tomorrow. We're doing the kind of I think they called it an extravaganza. But for me, dinner is always main dining room. I don't really favor specialty dining. But the top tip I've given previously, and I'll say it again at this juncture, is that rather than pay for, Queen's Grill or the Retreat or the what's the MSC one called, the ship within a ship on an MSC. It's called the thing. People at home are shouting at us right now.
Just proves that we're not scripted.
Well, it also proves that we're steerage passengers through and through. That's the other thing. But the point that I keep making is that rather than pay for your whole week to be a ship within a ship, if you choose wisely your specialty dining for just $30-40 a head once during the cruise, you can actually dine like you're in first class, because going to the formal steakhouse really is a cut above. The quality of the meats invariably, although I had a terrible time in Sir Samuel's Steakhouse on Queen Anne, and I ended up having a massive argument with them about it. And I said to them, it was just, they said, well, what was wrong with it? You ate everything. And I said, everything was wrong, but we were starving, so we ate it. But there was no vibe. The service was weird. The food was inconsistent and weird.
Which is such a switch from Veranda,
right?
Because my goodness, I tell you what,
you're talking about the Veranda grill on the 3 other ships.
Yeah, the Veranda on the other 3 Cunard ships. I would go there just for the chocolate chip skillet cookie. Oh my gosh, it comes out cooking in the skillet. It's just the most amazing thing. But that is an experience where I eat like you have described, and I just have to go and sleep afterwards.
Yes. Well, I just take a bucket with me into the dining room. I find that's the easiest way to go about it. But
a bucket with a bow tie.
A bucket with a bow tie. But so I think it's worth, do your evening meals in main dining, because it's nice to dress up. And again, make it different from being at home. You're not going to put a tuxedo on at home necessarily to have dinner with your partner in the kitchen, but you might do it on a ship. And I think it's worth doing. And we love dressing up. We have such fun doing that. And so main dining, find the specialty nights. And if not, one specialty restaurant every now and then might be worth the upcharge. Oh, and I suppose another top tip is specialty dining in the daytime is often half the price of the nighttime, and it's the same menu. So if you want that really good steak, go get it for the lunch service, and it'll be $20 instead of $40 a head.
Exactly. Yes, that's so true. I think the biggest takeaway I got out of this is the powdered eggs comment.
I'm so sorry that I've lost your respect, but I think
I'd love to know in the comments if people are in team real eggs or team powdered eggs.
I think there's a secret movement of those of us who love cruise ship powdered eggs.
Maybe. It's just reinforcing my belief that I am no longer in touch with the world.
I thought you were going to refer to me as the youth of today. I was happy to take that.
Yes. Well, we'll re-record that one, Anthony. It just reinforces my belief that you're the youth of today. And
well, listen, we've got a lot of travel going on. You're about to get on Queen Mary 2. I'm getting on Queen Mary 2 the day you get off Queen Mary 2. I'm getting on Queen Mary 2. So we're gonna.
How did you manage to do that?
We're going to high five on the gangplank. I've also got 2 Royal Caribbean cruises in the next few weeks as well. I'm squeezing 2 on, so we'll be talking about.
And I'm going on board Queen Mary, Anthony.
You're going on board Queen Mary, which I was on last week. That's Queen Mary in Long Beach, and so we're going to hear a lot about that, which is fantastic. Yes. And I've just booked Celebrity Beyond for later in the year as well. So I'm looking forward to that. So we've got so much to look forward to.
Actually, I've just got a couple of extra celebrity lecture gigs as well.
Oh, that's right, yes.
Celebrities being very, very proactive and generous to offering speaker placements. So we
better wrap up because we're trying to keep these shows to under an hour out of respect for people's quality of life. but
also, like, if you're watching this show, right, and you're enjoying the conversation, but you're running out of time because not everyone can sit and watch for an hour. We are on all the podcast platforms too. So if you've got Apple Podcasts, you've got a Spotify, or whatever your favorite podcast is, you can just find the episode. They're all numbered 1 through 6 at the moment, and you can pick up the conversation there.
Something I heard from a listener was that this podcast, you don't necessarily need to listen to it chronologically. You can dip in, you can dip out, you can switch around, and you'll be able to kind of pick up what we're talking about pretty quickly, especially if you love cruising as much as we do. So that's a good place to end.
Until next week,
Chris Frame, thank you very much, and happy cruising.